Lena Whitmore, Evan Cole, a quiet town that trusted the wrong person. On the surface, everything looked normal. A respected teacher, a promising student, and a community that believed nothing bad could happen behind its familiar streets. But hidden beneath routine schedules and friendly smiles was a dangerous secret slowly moving toward violence. One decision to speak up, one fear of being exposed, and one moment of control slipping away would connect these names forever. What began as trust turned into manipulation, and what ended as silence became one of the most disturbing crimes the town had ever known. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Lena Whitmore had spent years building a life that looked flawless from the outside. She lived in a small American town where everyone noticed everything, yet no one ever noticed her in the wrong way. She taught history at the local high school and was known for being organized, calm, and deeply committed to her work. Parents believed their children were safe around her. School officials trusted her judgment without hesitation. Students saw her as someone who understood them better than most adults did. That trust became the foundation of her public image. Every morning, Lena followed the same routine. She woke up before sunrise, exercised lightly, prepared a simple breakfast, and left her house at exactly the same time each day. Her home was spotless, almost unnaturally clean, with everything placed carefully where it belonged. There were no family photos on the walls, no signs of close friendships, and no personal clutter. To outsiders, it seemed like she preferred a quiet, disciplined life. In reality, this controlled environment helped her keep her secrets buried. At school, Lena never raised her voice. She spoke gently and listened carefully, which made students feel important and valued. She remembered small details about their lives, their fears, and their struggles. Many students who felt ignored at home or invisible among their peers felt drawn to her attention. Teachers praised her dedication, especially when she stayed late to help students who were falling behind. No one questioned why she volunteered so often for extra responsibilities involving student mentoring. Outside of school, Lena kept her distance from the community. She rarely attended social events and avoided deep connections with adults her own age. Some people found her mysterious, others simply thought she was private. Her isolation made it easier for her to live two separate lives without raising suspicion. The town had no reason to doubt her, and that blind trust gave her freedom. What no one realized was that Lena carefully studied how people saw her. She understood that being dependable and gentle made others lower their guard. She knew which behaviors looked caring and which would appear suspicious. Every smile, every supportive gesture, and every late-night study session was calculated to protect the image she had created. Beneath the surface, something darker was slowly growing. Lena felt powerful in moments when students depended on her emotionally. That sense of control filled an emptiness she never spoke about. She convinced herself that she was helping them, that her involvement made their lives better. Over time, those thoughts became excuses, and those excuses became habits. By the time the town began another peaceful school year, Lena Whitmore was no longer just a trusted teacher. She was a person living behind a carefully maintained mask, one that hid dangerous desires and a future no one could yet imagine. As weeks passed, Lena Whitmore began to blur boundaries that should never be touched. What started as ordinary academic support slowly turned into something far more personal. She paid close attention to which students stayed quiet in class, which ones struggled at home, and which ones craved approval. These were the students she focused on most. She offered them special attention under the excuse of guidance and support, creating a sense of dependence that grew stronger with time. Lena arranged private study sessions after school, often lasting longer than necessary. She framed these meetings as chances to improve grades or prepare for exams, but the focus gradually shifted. She encouraged students to share their personal problems, their fears, and their secrets. She positioned herself as the only adult who truly understood them. The students felt chosen, important, and protected. They did not realize they were being emotionally manipulated. The meetings slowly moved away from the classroom. Sometimes they took place in empty school buildings, sometimes in public places where no one would suspect wrongdoing. Lena was careful to avoid attention. She understood the importance of timing, locations, and behavior. Nothing appeared openly inappropriate to outsiders, yet everything was wrong beneath the surface. Each step crossed a line, but it happened so gradually that no one noticed when the line disappeared. Lena justified her actions by telling herself that she was helping these students grow. She convinced herself that emotional closeness was part of mentorship. In her mind, the rules did not apply because she believed she was different from others who had been caught before. This belief made her reckless in subtle ways, though she still remained cautious enough to avoid clear evidence. Some students began to change. Their behavior shifted, their focus dropped, and their moods became unstable. Teachers noticed small warning signs but dismissed them as typical teenage stress. Parents assumed their children were simply overwhelmed by school pressure. No one connected these changes back to Lena because her reputation made such suspicions seem impossible. Behind closed doors, Lena felt a growing sense of control. She enjoyed knowing that her words carried weight and that her approval mattered deeply to these young people. That sense of power became addictive. It filled an emotional void she had ignored for years. Each interaction pushed her further from reality and deeper into a dangerous mindset. At the same time, Lena grew increasingly paranoid. She watched her surroundings carefully and monitored student behavior closely. She feared exposure, but believed she could manage the risk. Her confidence came from years of being trusted without question. The system that should have protected students had unknowingly given her cover. By the end of the semester, the situation had moved far beyond poor judgment. Lines had been crossed repeatedly, and consequences were quietly building. What Lena did not realize was that control can quickly turn into fear, and fear has a way of forcing terrible decisions. The damage was already done, even if no one was ready to see it yet. The first warning arrived quietly, almost easy to ignore. An email was sent to the school administration from an untraceable address, written carefully and without emotion. It did not accuse directly, but suggested that certain boundaries were being crossed by a trusted staff member. The message listed dates and times when students were seen staying late, along with places that did not match official school activities. Administrators read it, discussed it briefly, and decided to watch the situation without taking action. The lack of clear proof made them hesitant. Over the next 2 weeks, more messages arrived. Each one was more detailed than the last. They described patterns instead of isolated incidents. Certain students were named, along with changes in their academic performance and behavior. The emails pointed out how these students had once been engaged and social, but had grown withdrawn and anxious. The writer never mentioned Lena Whitmore by name, but the details narrowed the focus sharply in her direction. School officials quietly began an internal review. They checked attendance logs, security camera footage, and after-school activity records. On paper, everything looked acceptable. Lena had permission to mentor students, and no rule clearly limited the time she could spend doing so. The lack of policy gaps made the investigation fragile. Without a complaint from a parent or student, the administration feared legal consequences if they acted too quickly. Meanwhile, Lena sensed the shift before anyone confronted her. She noticed subtle changes in how administrators spoke to her and how often her schedule was reviewed. She became more careful, canceling some meetings and changing routines. Her calm expression never faded, but inside she felt exposed. She understood that someone was watching, and that knowledge made her restless. The anonymous emails suddenly stopped. No explanation followed, and no final warning arrived. The silence was unsettling. Administrators assumed the sender had lost interest or realized there was nothing solid to report. The internal review slowed and was eventually shelved. The school returned to its normal rhythm, believing the situation had resolved itself. What no one knew was that the silence was not a sign of safety, but of fear. The person sending the emails had realized how dangerous the situation truly was. The warnings had not triggered action, and that failure made the risk feel heavier. Whoever had tried to expose the truth understood they were now alone. Lena interpreted the silence differently. To her, it felt like victory. She believed she had escaped consequences once again. That belief strengthened her sense of control and made her bolder in her private actions. The fear she had felt began to turn into confidence, and confidence slowly became arrogance. The system had missed its chance. The warnings were there, clear enough to raise concern, but not strong enough to force intervention. By the time the emails faded into memory, something irreversible was already moving toward its breaking point. The danger had not passed. It had only gone quiet, waiting for the moment when it would surface in a way no one could ignore. The disappearance happened at a moment when the town felt most at ease. It was early autumn, the kind of season when routines felt stable and nothing seemed out of place. Evan Cole had recently graduated and was beginning to plan his future. He was known as responsible, cautious, and close to his family. When he failed to return home one Friday night, concerns spread quickly. At first, people assumed there was a simple explanation, a missed call or a change of plans. By morning, that hope faded. Evan's car was found parked near a quiet stretch of road on the edge of town, close to a wooded area that locals rarely visited. The keys were missing, and his phone was nowhere inside the vehicle. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, and no obvious damage. It looked as if he had stepped out voluntarily and vanished into the darkness. That detail disturbed investigators from the beginning. As news of the disappearance spread, the community reacted with shock. Evan did not fit the profile of someone who would run away. He had no history of trouble, no known enemies, and no recent emotional breakdowns. Friends described him as focused and cautious. Teachers remembered him as quiet but determined. His family insisted something was terribly wrong. Police began tracing Evan's final movements. Security cameras showed him leaving a gas station just outside town late that evening. After that, there were no confirmed sightings. Phone records revealed his last calls and messages, leading investigators to a small but critical detail. One of the final contacts listed was Lena Whitmore. The connection raised questions, but at first it did not feel alarming. She had been his teacher in the past, and that seemed like a harmless explanation. As hours turned into days, the mood shifted from worry to fear. Search teams combed the wooded area near the abandoned car. Dogs picked up a scent, but lost it quickly, suggesting Evan may have entered another vehicle. That possibility opened darker theories. The idea that someone he trusted could have lured him away began to circulate quietly among investigators. Lena followed the news closely. She attended school as usual, maintained her calm demeanor, and expressed concern when the topic came up. No one noticed anything unusual in her behavior. She appeared composed, helpful, and sympathetic. Yet behind that controlled exterior, pressure was building. Evan's disappearance was not just a tragedy unfolding nearby. It was connected to something she had been trying desperately to keep buried. As the investigation stalled, the town grew restless. Candlelight vigils were held, flyers were posted, and hope slowly weakened. Each passing day made it harder to believe Evan would return alive. What no one yet understood was that his disappearance was not random. It was the result of secrets colliding, fear turning into action, and a moment when control slipped into irreversible violence. The quiet town had already crossed into a nightmare, even if it did not yet know how deep it would go. The discovery came just as hope was beginning to fade. 3 days after Evan Cole vanished, a group of hikers entered a remote section of forest far from the main search area. The location was uneven, thick with fallen branches and loose soil, a place most people avoided. What first caught their attention was the smell. It was faint but unnatural, cutting through the cold air. As they moved closer, they noticed disturbed ground that did not match the surrounding area. Authorities arrived quickly and secured the scene. Beneath a shallow layer of soil and leaves lay Evan's body. The way he had been buried showed haste rather than care. Investigators immediately recognized that this was not an accident and not a random act of violence. The injuries were severe and deliberate. This was a killing driven by emotion and fear, not opportunity. The condition of the body revealed that Evan had been attacked elsewhere and moved after death. There were marks indicating restraint, and traces of chemicals suggested an attempt to remove evidence. These details told investigators that the person responsible had time, access to supplies, and knowledge of how crimes were investigated. This was not the work of a stranger passing through town. The forest itself offered few clues, but the evidence found on Evan did. Fibers stuck to his clothing did not match the natural environment. They were synthetic, clean, and out of place. Soil samples on his shoes came from a different location, pointing to another site where the attack likely occurred. Every detail added weight to the theory that the killer was someone organized and familiar with Evan. The news devastated the town. What had started as a missing person case turned into a murder investigation overnight. Fear replaced hope, and trust began to fracture. People locked their doors earlier, watched their surroundings more closely, and questioned what they thought they knew about their neighbors. Parents became anxious, especially those with teenagers. Investigators shifted their focus from searching to reconstructing Evan's final days. They examined his digital footprint, his movements, and his relationships. The connection to Lena Whitmore returned, this time with greater urgency. Phone data confirmed multiple contacts between them in the days before his disappearance. The timing no longer felt coincidental. While the town mourned, the investigation quietly tightened. The brutality of the murder suggested desperation. Evan had not just been silenced, he had been erased in a way meant to prevent him from speaking again. That realization pointed toward motive rather than impulse. What unsettled investigators most was the level of planning involved. The shallow grave, the cleaning agents, and the attempt to separate the crime scene from the body all suggested someone who believed they could outsmart the system. But mistakes had been made, and those mistakes were beginning to form a clear path. The forest had given up its secret, but it was only the beginning. Evan's death was no longer just a tragedy. It was a warning that something deeply wrong had been hiding in plain sight, waiting until fear pushed it into the open. The search of Lena Whitmore's home began quietly, without attention from the media. Investigators entered expecting to confirm routine details, but what they found shifted the entire case. At first, the house looked exactly as people imagined it would. Everything was clean, organized, and carefully maintained. There were no obvious signs of panic or chaos. That calm appearance made what came next even more disturbing. Inside a locked storage area, officers found sealed plastic containers hidden behind stacked boxes. Within them were personal items belonging to Evan Cole. His watch, a notebook, and clothing he had been seen wearing the night he disappeared were carefully wrapped and preserved. There was no logical explanation for why these items were there. The discovery destroyed any remaining doubt about Lena's involvement. As the search continued, investigators uncovered handwritten notebooks stored in a drawer beneath Lena's bed. The pages were filled with names, dates, and detailed observations about students. Some entries described emotional states, moments of vulnerability, and changes in behavior. The writing was methodical and obsessive. It showed long-term planning, not sudden impulse. The notebooks revealed a pattern that stretched back years. Forensic teams examined the house closely. Cleaning chemicals found in a utility closet matched substances detected on Evan's body. Fibers collected from the floor matched those discovered on his clothing. Each piece of evidence quietly tightened the case against her. What once appeared to be a safe, controlled home now looked like a carefully managed hiding place. As investigators connected the evidence, a disturbing picture formed. Lena had not just crossed boundaries, she had built a system of control. She selected students who were emotionally isolated and slowly made herself central to their lives. When that control was threatened, she reacted not with restraint, but with calculation. Evan had stopped being someone she could manage. The realization that others might have been affected added urgency to the case. Authorities began reviewing school records and interviewing former students. Patterns emerged that matched what was written in the notebooks. Emotional manipulation, isolation, and fear were common themes. What had gone unnoticed for years now appeared painfully clear. Lena's public image collapsed overnight. News spread quickly once the warrant became public. The trusted teacher was no longer seen as quiet and caring, but as someone who had used her position to harm and control. The town struggled to accept how easily they had been deceived. Parents questioned how many warning signs they had ignored. The evidence left little room for doubt. Evan's belongings, the forensic matches, and the written records all pointed to intent. This was not an accident or a moment of rage. It was the result of a long pattern finally exposed. By the time investigators finished the search, The case had transformed from a single murder investigation into something far darker. What was uncovered inside that house showed how dangerous unchecked trust can become and how silence allows harm to grow until it becomes impossible to stop. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a final and disturbing truth slowly emerged. The anonymous emails that had once warned the school were traced through advanced digital analysis. What initially seemed impossible became clear with time and careful work. The messages had not come from a concerned teacher or an outside observer. They had been sent by Evan Cole himself. This revelation changed the meaning of everything that had happened before. Evan had not been careless or naive. After graduating and turning 18, he began to understand the seriousness of what he had experienced. He recognized that what once felt confusing and overwhelming was actually manipulation. Instead of reacting emotionally, he chose patience. He gathered information quietly, saved records, and documented patterns. The emails were written carefully because he feared retaliation and did not trust the system to protect him. Evan believed that if he presented the facts calmly and anonymously, action would be taken without placing him in danger. When the school failed to act, his fear deepened. The silence from administrators made him realize how exposed he truly was. Still, he did not stop. Investigators later discovered that Evan had been preparing to meet with legal authorities. He was organizing evidence, planning to report everything formally. This was the moment when control slipped away from Lena completely. She discovered what Evan was doing before he could finish. The realization that her carefully protected image was about to collapse triggered something irreversible. The fear of exposure outweighed every boundary she had crossed before. Evan was no longer someone she could silence emotionally. He had become a threat to her freedom. The murder was not sudden or chaotic. Evidence showed it was planned quickly but deliberately. Lena chose a location, prepared materials, and acted with a level of focus that shocked investigators. Her actions were driven by panic, but executed with control. She believed that removing Evan would erase the danger. Instead, it created evidence that would follow her forever. What made the twist even darker was understanding Evan's final days. He had not been trying to hurt anyone. He wanted accountability and protection for others. His decision to come forward was an act of courage, not revenge. That courage cost him his life. When investigators shared this finding with the prosecution, the case reached a new level of gravity. Evan was no longer just a victim of murder. He became the one who had tried to stop the abuse and was killed for it. The system's failure to act earlier now carried devastating weight. The truth behind the emails exposed how fear, silence, and delayed action can empower someone dangerous. Evan's attempt to do the right thing revealed the darkest side of unchecked authority. The final twist was not just who sent the warnings, but how close justice had been before it was violently taken away. The arrest of Lena Whitmore marked the end of the investigation, but not the end of the damage. She was taken into custody without resistance, her calm expression unchanged as she was led away. News spread rapidly across the state, and the town that once trusted her struggled to understand how someone so respected could be responsible for such cruelty. The shock was deep, and the sense of betrayal even deeper. The trial revealed the full extent of what had been hidden for years. Evidence was presented methodically, leaving little room for doubt. The notebooks, the forensic matches, the phone records, and the digital trail from the anonymous emails formed a clear narrative. Each detail showed how authority had been abused and how manipulation had replaced care. The case became a national story, drawing attention to the dangers of ignoring early warnings. Former students came forward during the proceedings, not to seek attention, but to explain patterns that now made sense. Their experiences echoed one another, revealing how emotional control had been used to isolate and silence them. The court listened as the timeline of harm stretched back far longer than anyone had imagined. What once seemed unthinkable became undeniable. Evan Cole's role was finally understood in full. He was recognized as someone who tried to protect others, even when it placed him at risk. His preparation, restraint, and decision to document instead of confront showed maturity beyond his years. The tragedy was not just that he was killed, but that his warnings were not taken seriously when they mattered most. Lena was found guilty on all major charges. The sentence ensured she would never return to a classroom or regain the freedom she once controlled so carefully. The verdict brought a measure of justice, but it could not undo what had been lost. Evan's family received support from across the country, yet their grief remained unchanged. The town began to change after the trial. Schools updated policies, increased oversight, and created clearer reporting systems. Training programs focused on recognizing manipulation and protecting students. These changes came too late for Evan, but they stood as a promise to prevent similar harm in the future. Trust, once broken, proved difficult to rebuild. Teachers were watched more closely, and authority was no longer accepted without question. Parents became more involved, students more aware. The community learned that safety depends not on reputation, but on accountability. Evan's story did not fade with the verdict. It became a reminder of the cost of silence and the danger of ignoring discomfort. His attempt to expose the truth, though tragically cut short, forced a reckoning that could not be undone. The case ended in court, but its impact continued, reshaping how the town understood trust, power, and responsibility forever.